It's 2:47 a.m., January 24th, 1989. A phone rings inside the Florida State Prison switchboard. A correctional officer answers, his voice steady, but there's tension underneath. Time of death. A pause. 7:16 a.m. Eastern. Bundy is dead. Outside, hundreds of people are gathered beyond the prison gates. Some are holding signs, others chanting, faces lit by headlights and news crews. The air smells of burnt rubber, cigarette smoke, and cheap coffee, and the mood feels like a twisted celebration, part outrage, part relief. A man in a denim jacket raises his beer toward the pale edge of sunrise and shouts, "The devil's gone." The crowd roars, some clapping, some just staring at those concrete walls as if they might finally give something back. But inside, away from the shouting and the cameras, the prison is quieter than it has been in years. In a small, emptied cell, a cardboard box sits on a metal bunk, stamped on the side, property of Theodore R. Bundy. Inside that box, folded clothes, worn books, a few letters, legal paperwork, and a stack of cassette tapes, each one hand-labeled in careful, tidy block letters. Dates, places, a few cryptic words. Someone picks one up, turns it in their hand. The ink on the label has smudged at the edges from being handled so often. The tape slides into a player, a button clicks, the reels start to turn. There's a soft hiss, the murmur of the room, and then his voice. Calm, articulate, unrushed. "You want to know why people die, why I killed," he says. "You'll never understand if you keep listening for guilt instead of listening for control." No apology, no drama, just a statement as if he is explaining a concept in a classroom. For years, the world has already decided what Ted Bundy is. Monster, manipulator, charming psychopath. They've seen him argue in court, cross-examining witnesses. They've watched him smile for the cameras, joke with reporters, propose marriage in the middle of a trial. Those public performances made him infamous. But the voice on these tapes is different. On these tapes, recorded when he knew the end was real and close, he is not just fighting the death penalty anymore. He is fighting something else. Oblivion. He wants to be remembered, on his terms. He talks about a man like that, about someone who does those things, slipping in and out of the third person like a man who wants distance from himself. But every now and then the mask loosens, and he becomes, it's those moments that matter. He says, people think the story starts when girls begin to disappear. That's just when they started paying attention. The story starts long before that. The interviewer's voice is quiet, almost cautious. Then where does it start? He asks. Bundy doesn't hesitate. It starts, he says, with a boy who learns that what people see and what is really there can be two very different things. The irony is that when people talk about Bundy, they usually start at the other end. They start with the bodies, with the headlines. With Florida, with that last walk from his cell to the execution chamber, the white shirt, the restraints, the witnesses staring through a pane of glass. But that's the conclusion of his story, not the beginning. By that point, the mask has already worked for years. By that point, he has been the helpful law student, the political volunteer, the boyfriend, the co-worker, the man who looked too normal to be what he really was. He leans closer to the microphone. You can hear the faint scrape of the chair, the sound of him shifting his weight. Everyone wants there to be a moment, he says. A single point where everything changes. A snap, that's comforting. It means you can find it and say, there, that's where he went wrong. But it doesn't happen like that. It's an accumulation, little choices, little permissions. By the time you realize what you've become, you're already too far down the road to turn back. He lets that hang as if he knows exactly what it sounds like. From the outside, his life once looked almost ordinary. Born in 1946, raised in a family that pretended to be more straightforward than it really was. A boy who would grow up discovering that even his own identity had been a kind of lie, built on secrets about who his parents really were and what that meant for him. That's where this story really begins. Before the law school lectures, before the cross-country manhunt, before the word serial killer became attached to his name like a permanent brand. Back when he was just a kid learning how to read a room, how to mimic, how to show people exactly what they wanted to see. On the tape, the interviewer tries again. If the story starts there, he asks, with that boy, what was he missing? What did he learn that most people do? Bundy answers with something that's almost a whisper. He learned, he says, that if you're clever enough, if you're careful enough, people will believe whatever makes them most comfortable. They'll build you into whatever they need you to be. And once you understand that, you realize how easy it is to move through the world without anyone ever really seeing you. That idea runs under everything that comes later. It is the foundation of the double life he built. The reason he could call victims to his car without setting off alarms. The reason people who knew him described him as nice, helpful, even safe, right up until they realized what he had done. The tape continues. He does not list victims. He does not recount dates like a ledger. Instead, he circles around themes: power, fantasy, resentment, the thrill of getting away with it, the way each successful deception made the next one easier. He says, once a man like that discovers he can act on the things in his head and walk away, it changes the equation. He's not just thinking anymore, he's experimenting, testing the edges, finding out how invisible he really is. The interviewer asks, did it feel invisible? In the beginning, Bundy breathes in, then answers. It felt justified, he says, like the world owed him something and he'd finally found a way to collect. He never says the word Bundy. He never says his full name on this tape. He doesn't have to. The identity he cares about here is not the one on his birth certificate or his legal file. It's the persona he's sculpting in these final hours. The analyst, the man who can explain evil from the inside. For him, that is one last form of control. If he cannot escape the chair, he can at least try to shape the story. What you are hearing in this imagined final tape isn't just a man talking about murder. It's a man trying to edit his own legacy in real time. Trying to turn himself from a criminal into a case study, from a defendant into a narrator. But the truth of what he did, of the women he approached in parking lots, on campuses, near their homes, does not begin on death row. It begins years earlier, when he was still building the habit of deception, still learning that he could hide in charm and confidence and borrowed normalcy. From the outside, what happened on January 24th, 1989, looks simple. A condemned man, a scheduled execution. A crowd rejoicing at the news that Ted Bundy is finally gone. But what looked like a straightforward death row interview, just one more recording made before the lights went out, was actually the end point of a story he had been crafting for decades. A story about control image. And the distance between who he really was and who people thought he was. To understand how that story began, to understand how a boy became that man, and how that man turned into a killer who could move unnoticed for years, we have to leave this prison behind. We have to go back in time, back to the houses and streets and early relationships that taught him how to lie with a straight face and smile while he did it. Because the path that ended in an execution chamber in Florida did not start with a murder. It started with a child in a family full of secrets, in a world that taught him early that truth is flexible, and that if you're careful enough, even the people closest to you might never really know who you are. It starts like an ordinary summer day in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of day that looks harmless on a calendar, a date you write down without knowing it will never stop echoing. Morning comes soft over Seattle. On the University of Washington campus, students drift between classes, coffee cups in hand, backpacks slung over shoulders. Nobody knows that somewhere among them, Ted Bundy is already in motion. He wakes up, not as a different person, but as a man following a pattern. By now he has already crossed lines in the shadows, attempted abductions, encounters no one has fully pieced together, moments where something went wrong and he adjusted. Today he plans to get everything right. He dresses with care, nothing flashy, nothing memorable. Clothes that say student, law clerk, average guy, and nothing more. He checks the items he needs. The car, clean enough inside, ordinary enough outside. The sling or cast he'll use to fake an injury. The practiced story, simple and believable. Could you help me carry something to my car? I hurt my arm. By late morning, he's on campus. The place is alive with movement and noise, lectures, chatter, footsteps on concrete. The beauty of it for him is that nobody is really watching any one person for very long. That anonymity, the blur of faces, is his camouflage. He spends the late morning hours observing. He looks for someone alone, someone kind, someone who will feel just enough social pressure to say yes when a stranger asks for help. He studies body language, who looks rushed, who looks cautious, who looks open. To anyone else, he is just another young man lingering near the library or the parking lot, maybe waiting for a friend, maybe killing time. To him, this is hunting. By early afternoon, the heat picks up. Students are restless, wandering in and out of buildings, some heading toward the lake, some toward their cars. He adjusts his approach, watching for small windows of opportunity. A woman standing alone near the sidewalk, a student separating from a group, someone who glances at him and doesn't immediately look away. He knows his advantages. He is clean cut. He looks like he belongs. He can smile, sound educated, mention law school, drop a detail that makes him seem trustworthy without overdoing it. At some point, he makes contact. We can't hear the exact words, but the pattern is known. He approaches a young woman and asks for help loading something into his car. He gestures toward the cast or sling, apologizes for the inconvenience, sounds grateful, slightly embarrassed. He counts on her not wanting to seem rude. She hesitates. Then she agrees. From her point of view, it's a small kindness, a tiny, forgettable decision in a life full of them. From his point of view, this is the pivot, the moment when fantasy and reality switch places. They walk together toward the parking lot. The car is a pale Volkswagen, the kind of vehicle that barely registers in memory. Nothing about it screams danger. He has chosen it for exactly that reason. Somewhere between the open space of the campus and the closed space of that car, the tone shifts. Maybe he says something to put her at ease. Maybe he makes an offhand joke. Maybe he apologizes again for taking her time. But once she is close enough, once she is near the open door, near the passenger seat, the script he has rehearsed for years takes over. What happens next goes by faster than most people can process. A sudden move, a shove, a blow, a hand over the mouth. The transformation from helpful stranger to attacker happens in seconds. On the outside, the parking lot looks the same. Cars come and go. Students walk past. No one realizes that for one person, the world has just split in two. She doesn't come back to class. She doesn't make it to her next appointment. A friend might wonder where she went. A roommate might assume her plans changed. Hours pass before anyone understands that she is missing. By then, Bundy is already gone. That day does not stand alone. It is one in a series of days that follow a similar pattern, each with its own details, but all sharing the same structure. He blends in. He watches. He isolates. He acts. He vanishes. As the months go by, disappearances begin to cluster. In Washington, in Oregon, in Utah. Different towns, different campuses, different names and faces, but the same kind of victim. Young, intelligent women, often with long hair parted in the middle, often last seen near a car, near a parking lot, near a man who needed help. On another day, in another city, the routine repeats. He wakes up, lives his surface life, talking to co-workers, attending class, chatting with friends, while underneath he is planning. He drives out in the evening, sometimes crossing state lines, sometimes scouting places where he can be alone with his victim without interruption. He chooses locations that give him time: wooded areas, remote roads, places where a scream might not carry far enough. Each trip teaches him something: how to control someone more efficiently, how to minimize noise, how to leave fewer traces. More than once, he returns to life as usual immediately afterward. He shows up at work. He picks up the phone at the crisis hotline and spends hours talking strangers through their own pain and trauma, his voice calm, reassuring. No one on the other end of the line knows whose voice they are hearing. As the timeline stretches, the geography of his crimes widens. He moves from Washington to Utah. In Utah, the pattern starts again. A man in a cast, a request for help, a young woman who never arrives at a destination. Some victims fight. Some manage to escape, dazed, injured, their memories later becoming crucial pieces of the puzzle. They describe a man with dark hair, a cast, a friendly manner that turned violent without warning. Those descriptions will linger in police files, waiting to be connected. But at the time, each police department sees only its own slice of the timeline. A missing woman here. An attempted kidnapping there. A body discovered weeks or months later in a wooded area far from where she was last seen. The pattern that is obvious in hindsight was not obvious in real time. On some days, Bundy is a student studying for exams. On others, he is a boyfriend sharing dinner, smiling across a table, asking about someone's day. On still others, he is a driver scanning sidewalks for someone walking alone, rehearsing his lines, adjusting his story as needed. The hours of an ordinary day become a double ledger in his life. Morning, classes, work, errands. Afternoon, phone calls, friends, errands that look normal. Evening, opportunity. Late night, disposal, erasure, pretending nothing happened. There is a specific night that stands out in this long, grim sequence, a night in which the violence is not quiet, not contained. By the time he reaches Florida, his restraint has eroded. He has escaped custody more than once, crossed the country, and landed in a place where he feels both exposed and desperate. On that night, inside a sorority house, the violence is sudden and explosive. Multiple women attacked in a single burst of brutality. The control he once exercised, choosing isolated spots, minimizing witnesses, gives way to a reckless, almost chaotic assault. Survivors and witnesses will later describe confusion, terror, the sound of footsteps, the aftermath in rooms that should have been safe. That night leaves physical evidence, injuries, and testimony that will later tie him directly to the crimes. In the investigation that follows, as police search the surrounding area and begin cataloging what he left behind, they find something that at first seems insignificant. A small, crumpled receipt on the floor of his car, overlooked during an earlier stop, now bagged and labeled as evidence. A single red-printed receipt. It doesn't seem important yet, just another scrap of paper lost under a seat. But that small, forgettable item will later connect places, times, and actions in a way that Bundy never intended. Keep that in mind, because it will become crucial later. While investigators in different states struggle to keep up, Bundy continues to divide his life into segments, the part people see, and the part no one is supposed to. He attends law proceedings, sometimes representing himself, speaking with confidence about legal technicalities. He flirts with reporters. He receives letters from strangers who have turned him into a twisted kind of celebrity in their minds. But the timeline of terror does not run on court dates and interviews alone. It runs on the invisible hours, the drives, the scouting, the quiet moments where he watches a potential victim walking down a street and decides whether today is the day he acts. To understand the scale of what he did, imagine laying out a calendar year by year, and marking every day something related to his crimes happened. The planning, the stalking, the abductions, the assaults, the efforts to hide what he had done. The calendar fills quickly. The blank days shrink. The people who knew him during those years, the ones who only saw the surface, remember small oddities, mood swings, unexplained absences, lies about where he'd been. They noticed he was acting strange, but they dismissed it as stress, relationship drama, work pressure. They shouldn't have. By the time law enforcement in multiple states began sharing information, the timeline was already crowded with victims. Photos on bulletin boards, pins on maps, case files stacked high on desks. What looked to each jurisdiction like isolated tragedies were, in fact, chapters in a single narrative written by the same man. And in that narrative, every hour of his day mattered. From the moment he stepped out of bed and chose what mask to wear, to the moment he parked his car at night and pretended to be just another man going home, Ted Bundy was living out a life he had carefully split in two. On one side of the divide, he was the student, the volunteer, the boyfriend, the future lawyer. On the other side, he was the predator, the planner, the man who used charm as a weapon and routine as camouflage. For years, the world only saw the first side. The second side was written in missing persons reports, in shallow grave, in the memories of survivors who escaped his car and lived to describe the horror. It would take an investigation that crossed state lines, connected timelines, and interrogated every strange detail, even that red receipt on a car floor, to finally bring both sides of his life crashing together. Before the crowds, before the cameras, before the word monster followed his name, there was just a boy everyone called Ted. Not the Ted Bundy of headlines and courtroom sketches, but a quiet, watchful child growing up in a house where the story of who he was had already been edited. He was born Theodore Robert Cowell in 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, to a young, unmarried mother. From the very beginning, adults around him treated the truth like something that needed managing, not sharing. He spent his earliest years believing his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his older sister. Imagine the effect of that, even if a child can't yet put it into words. From the outside, the house looked stable. A working-class family, a roof over their heads, routines, traditions. But under that roof, reality and appearance were already pulling apart. Ted was living in a lie before he knew what a lie was. As he grew older, the official story shifted. His mother moved with him to Washington, remarried, and he took the surname Bundy. Now he was Ted Bundy, part of a new family, a new narrative. Once again, the adults around him rewrote the script, who his father was, what his past meant, how things were supposed to look to neighbors and friends. For a boy like Ted, that was a powerful lesson. Not just that people kept secrets, but that they were willing to repackage those secrets and call them normal. Whatever unease he felt, whatever confusion he carried, the message was clear. What matters is not what's true, but what people are willing to believe. In school, Ted wasn't the class clown or the obvious troublemaker. He learned to watch first. He studied how other kids moved through the world, what made teachers smile, what made adults proud. He figured out how to mirror it back. Classmates would later describe him as reserved, a little distant, sometimes awkward, sometimes charming. He could be polite, helpful, eager to please when he chose to be. Those who only saw him in passing often remembered a decent, ordinary boy. But there are hints, even then, of something else. He struggled with belonging. He felt different, but not in a way he could name. He had trouble forming deep, genuine connections. Instead, he learned to perform them. He became skilled at presenting the version of himself that best fit the room, with adults, respectful and responsible. With peers, just enough confidence to seem interesting, never enough vulnerability to feel exposed. Underneath, he harbored private frustrations, resentments, and fantasies of being someone more important, more admired, more in control. As a teenager, he discovered a different kind of power, anonymity and observation. He would wander neighborhoods at night, peering through windows, watching people who didn't know he was there. It wasn't yet the level of violence he would one day reach, but psychologically, it matters. Those moments gave him a sense of secret ownership over other people's lives. He could see them, they couldn't see him. That imbalance is important. It's the earliest echo of the dynamic he would later recreate in far more dangerous ways. One person completely aware, the other completely unaware. One person acting, the other person not even knowing yet that anything is wrong. At the same time, Ted learned how much appearances could shield him. He did well enough in school. He dressed neatly. He could be articulate when he needed to be. He understood that if he looked put together and intelligent, people would give him the benefit of the doubt. By the time he reached college age, that skill set had sharpened. He bounced between schools, experimented with majors, and eventually landed in environments where polish and ambition were rewarded. Politics, law, social causes. He volunteered in political campaigns, talked about public service, and presented himself as someone going places. The people around him mostly saw what they wanted to see, a bright young man interested in law and government, a potential leader, someone with a future. Behind that, though, there were cracks. He lied on applications, stretched the truth about his background, stole small things, and manipulated people's perceptions of him. He could be strangely detached in relationships, breaking off contact suddenly, then reappearing when it suited him. Friends noticed he was acting strange at times, but they dismissed it as stress, insecurity, or just Ted being Ted. They shouldn't have. One of the pivotal relationships in his early adult life was with a sophisticated, educated woman from a more affluent background. She represented status, acceptance, and the kind of life he felt he deserved. When that relationship faltered, when she began to doubt his honesty and ambition, it cut deeply. To someone already nursing insecurities about self-worth and legitimacy, it was a wound to his pride and identity. He would later present himself as a man driven forward by rejection, by humiliation, by a desire to prove himself. He re-enrolled in school, dressed better, spoke with more confidence, and reconnected with her, trying to win her back not just as a partner, but as evidence that he could be the man he wanted to appear to be. On the surface, it looked like a young man getting his life together. Underneath, it planted a dangerous seed. The idea that he could rebuild his image at will, that he could reinvent himself simply by changing his costume and lines. At the same time, a darker inner world was growing. Bundy later spoke about violent pornography, about escalating fantasies, about spending more and more time in his head envisioning scenarios in which he was completely dominant and others were powerless. Whether this was a full explanation or another way of controlling the narrative, it points to a psychological shift. Fantasy wasn't just a passing thought, it was becoming something he nurtured. On the outside, he could still be the caring boyfriend, the smiling volunteer, the promising student of law and psychology. He even worked at a crisis hotline, listening to people in their most vulnerable moments, offering calm, reassuring guidance. The irony is impossible to ignore. The same voice that comforted strangers over the phone would one day be the voice luring women to their deaths. Co-workers from that hotline would later remember him as patient and empathetic, someone who took calls seriously and seemed genuinely invested in helping. They would look back in disbelief, trying to reconcile the man they knew with the man on the news. That gap between how he appeared and who he was becoming widened year by year, but it widened quietly. There was no single explosion, no obvious breaking point that friends or family could point to and say, that's when everything changed. Instead, something more subtle was happening. Ted was rehearsing charm, rehearsing lies, rehearsing how to move through the world without leaving a ripple. He was learning what made people trust him: eye contact, a polite smile, a well-timed joke, a story about law school or politics that made him seem responsible and engaged. He was also learning what people didn't question: why he parked where he did, why he knew so much about campus routines, why he sometimes appeared in places that seemed random but weren't random to him at all. These early years, the before, are crucial because they show that Ted Bundy did not appear out of nowhere as a fully formed killer. He was built in layers: family secrets, social performance, quiet resentments, and private fantasies. Each layer reinforced the others. To the people around him, he was sometimes odd, sometimes arrogant, sometimes unreliable, but still within the bounds of what they considered normal. They saw stress, not danger. They saw insecurity, not predation. They shouldn't have. By the time young women began to disappear in the Pacific Northwest, Ted Bundy had already spent years perfecting the skills that would let him get close to them: how to act harmless, how to appear slightly vulnerable, even when he was the most dangerous person in the room, how to read a stranger's hesitation and talk them past it. Outwardly, he was still the promising law student, the political volunteer, the helpful boyfriend, the friendly guy at the hotline. Inwardly, he was drifting further and further into a world where other people weren't real to him in the way they should have been. They were props. They were instruments. They were ways to feel powerful. The before is not an excuse. It does not absolve him. But it does matter, because it shows how someone like Ted Bundy could exist for so long right in front of people and not be recognized for what he was. By the time the first victim got into his car, he was not improvising. He was executing a role he had been casting, writing, and rehearsing for years. And on the day everything changed, the day a bright, promising young woman vanished from a college campus after talking to a man with a sling on his arm and a polite smile. No one around him realized that the double life he'd been building in secret had just crossed a line it would never return from. There's a room in a police station that smells like burnt coffee, sweat, and paper. On one wall, there's a map with pins stabbed into it: Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, Florida. On another, there are photos, smiling faces that never came home. This is where the story starts to tighten. Detectives in Washington have been staring at their board for months. Young women, mostly students, vanishing from campuses and nearby streets. Some last seen talking to a man. The descriptions are frustratingly similar. Clean-cut, nice-looking, dark hair, maybe driving a VW, maybe wearing a sling or cast. Individually, each case looks like a tragedy. Together, they look like a pattern. One detective circles the word Ted on a notepad. Several witnesses mentioned that name, a man who introduced himself that way while asking for help at Lake Sammamish, where two women disappeared on the same day. He had a cast. He needed help loading something into his car. He said his name was Ted. It's not much, but it's more than they had before. In Utah, another group of detectives is staring at their own board. They have a missing woman last seen leaving a bookstore. Another pulled toward a car by a man with a cast who asked for help. One survived and described him. A sketch opens the door to a flood of tips. Meanwhile, in Colorado, a similar story is unfolding. Different town, same kind of victim, same kind of approach. The name Ted begins to float through multiple files, sometimes as a person of interest, sometimes just as a note with a question mark beside it. At first, these departments do not know they're looking for the same man. The files live in different cabinets, under different case numbers, in different states with different priorities. But some detectives, the ones who can't let go at night, start making calls. They talk about the VW. They talk about the cast. They talk about a man who seems normal right up until he is. The investigation is messy. There are dead ends everywhere. Officers pull over the wrong Volkswagens and question the wrong men. Suspects are brought in, interrogated, then released when alibis check out. The public, hearing rumors of a phantom abducting women, pressures police for quick answers. Politicians worry about panic. Campus officials urge students to be careful, travel in groups, keep their doors locked. Some detectives latch onto the idea of a stranger who doesn't belong in the community. Others wonder if the offender might be hiding in plain sight, a student, an employee, a neighbor. They argue over profiles, over motives, over whether the same man could really be responsible for crimes in so many different places. In the middle of all this, Ted Bundy is already on their radar, but not yet pinned down. An ex-girlfriend in Washington, disturbed by news reports and the emerging sketch, calls police. She tells them her former boyfriend, Ted, drives a VW, has been in and out of law programs, and sometimes behaves in ways that unsettled her. She doesn't want to believe it, but she can't ignore the similarities. Her call places his name into a file. It does not yet put him in handcuffs, but it plants a flag. Detectives add him to a list. They interview him. He is polite, cooperative, calm. He talks about law school, about his ambitions. He seems intelligent, reasonable, even slightly offended at the implication. Some officers come away thinking, there's no way this guy did it. He just doesn't fit the picture they have in their heads of a monster. That's one of the investigation's first big traps, the gap between who he looks like and what he's suspected of. Meanwhile, physical evidence trickles in. In wooded areas and remote locations, bodies and remains are discovered months after disappearances. The environment has taken its toll: time, weather, animals. Details are blurred, clues erased. Forensic science is limited. DNA analysis isn't yet the tool it will one day become. Investigators work with what they have: fibers, shoe prints, bite marks, impressions, hairs, and the rare surviving witness. Every new discovery adds weight to the case, but not always clarity. Different jurisdictions use different labs, different procedures, different systems for cataloging their evidence. That makes connecting the dots slower and more fragile than it should be. Bundy's arrest in Utah for a traffic stop becomes a turning point. An officer, suspicious of his behavior and his car, finds strange items, things that do not belong to an ordinary law student. There are tools that look less like repair equipment and more like a kit for restraint and control. The items are seized. The officer's intuition is logged. Now, Ted isn't just a name on a list. He's a man tied to an unnerving set of objects. As they dig deeper, Utah investigators connect him to attempted abductions and missing women in their state. They bring him in. He hires lawyers. He fights. He smiles for the cameras. Meanwhile, detectives in Washington and Colorado hear his name again. The same man they've been circling in their own files is being held elsewhere. Slowly, competing theories start to merge. The idea that this might be one offender, not many. There are, however, wrong turns. Some detectives chase leads that go nowhere, other suspects who look good on paper but fall apart under scrutiny. Some cling to older theories, even as new information emerges. In some offices, Bundy is still seen as unlikely, too poised, too articulate, too outwardly respectable. Jails and courthouses become part of the story. Ted is locked up, then manages to escape not once, but twice. First by jumping from a courthouse window during a recess. Later by carefully cutting his way through a ceiling and slipping out of a jail. Each escape is an embarrassment to authorities and a gift to Bundy's sense of superiority. Each failure forces law enforcement to start again, to widen searches, to double-check assumptions. Then comes Florida. After his second escape, Bundy travels across the country to a place where no one is yet looking for him. There, under a different name, he resurfaces in a new community. The Florida crimes, especially the sorority house attacks, are brutal, visible, hard to dismiss as anything but the work of someone deeply dangerous and out of control. This time, the evidence starts stacking up faster. Witnesses place a suspicious man near the house. Survivors give descriptions. Fibers, impressions, and other physical traces are collected from the scene and from his car once he is finally arrested again. Police stop a stolen car. The driver gives a false name. He tries charm, then indignation, then silence. Eventually, his real identity emerges. Ted Bundy, escapee, already suspected in multiple states. Now the investigation has a face and a body in custody that match the ghost they've been chasing on paper. Detectives from around the country converge. They bring their files, their open cases, their unsolved disappearances. They compare notes, maps, timelines, photos. The more they share, the more the shape of Bundy's crimes becomes clear. The types of victims, the patterns of approach, the travel routes, the dates that line up with his movements. Forensic experts enter the picture more forcefully. They analyze bite marks left on one Florida victim, comparing them to impressions from Bundy's teeth. They examine hairs found in his car and apartment, linking them back to known victims. They scrutinize fibers from clothing and upholstery. All of this helps stitch together a case strong enough for trial. But even here, it's not a straight line. Some defense experts challenge the reliability of certain forensic techniques. Some jurors are unsettled by the idea of convicting a man largely on scientific evidence they don't fully understand. Prosecutors know they need more than just lab reports. They need narrative coherence, a story the jury can follow. That's where the quieter, odder pieces of evidence matter. Things like gas receipts, parking tickets, and that crumpled red-printed receipt from his car. On their own, these items are mundane. Together, they place him in specific places at specific times. They undercut his alibis. They show that when he claimed to be in one spot, he was actually traveling near where women vanished or bodies were found. The red receipt, the one that once looked like trash on a floorboard, becomes part of a chain that ties his movements to the crimes. It helps prove that his life on paper, the image he presented, doesn't match the geography of his actions. Behind closed doors, detectives feel a grim mix of vindication and exhaustion. Years of hunches, late nights, and unanswered questions are finally aligning. But for every answer they find, there are still gaps. Victims who may never be identified, locations he never revealed, stories he took to his grave. The investigation is never as clean as it appears in retellings. It's full of overlapping efforts, miscommunications, ego clashes, and jurisdictional friction. Some officers share information freely, others guard their cases too tightly. The case grinds forward anyway, pushed by the persistence of those who cannot let it go. By the time Florida prepares to put Ted Bundy on trial for the sorority house murders, the broader picture of his crimes is clear enough for investigators, if not fully captured on paper. They know they have a man who has operated across multiple states with multiple victims over multiple years. They know he is dangerous, intelligent, and unrepentant. They know he is good at lying and even better at performing. What they still don't fully know, and what will matter most once he's convicted, is why. That question, the one that pulls at detectives, prosecutors, survivors, and the public, will follow Bundy into the courtroom, onto death row, and into those final tapes. Because catching him and proving what he did is only one part of the story. Understanding how he became what he became, and what was happening inside his head as he moved from life to life, state to state, victim to victim, is the part that keeps people awake at night. The investigation, for all its flaws and victories, solves the who and the how. The why is what waits for us next. The moment of clarity doesn't arrive like a movie scene. There is no single door kicked open, no dramatic confession under a spotlight. Instead, it comes as a slow, tightening realization. All the scattered pieces really do point to the same man. By the time Ted Bundy sits in a Florida courtroom, the world already knows his name. What the jury must decide is whether the man in the well-pressed shirt, taking notes and occasionally whispering to his counsel, is also the man who moved like a shadow through campus, housing a stranger in the night with a piece of wood in his hand and murder on his mind. The prosecution starts, not with horror, but with structure. They walk the jury through timelines, maps, and witness accounts. They talk about the stolen car, the fake IDs, the trail of petty theft and flight that brought Bundy from Colorado to Florida after his escape. Bit by bit, they build the sense that he is not just unlucky, not just misunderstood, but someone who has been running for a very long time. Then come the witnesses from the sorority house. They speak of waking in the dark to strange noises, of glimpsing a figure, of finding friends brutally attacked in their beds. Their voices tremble, but they stay steady enough to point to the man who did it. They point to Bundy. Next, the experts take the stand. Forensic dentists present plaster molds of teeth, photographs of bite marks, overlays, and diagrams. They explain how the unique pattern of his dental impressions matches the injuries on one victim's body. Whatever the limitations of the science, the impact on the jury is obvious. It is one thing to hear about a faceless attacker. It is another to see a specific jawline, a specific bite, linked to a specific wound. Then there are the hairs and fibers. Microscopic strands recovered from his car and apartment compared to samples from victims. No single strand tells the whole story, but together they weave a net that is hard to ignore. Still, Bundy fights back in his way. He cross-examines witnesses. He questions procedures. He treats the courtroom like a stage and the trial like a debate. At times, he even seems to believe he can outtalk the evidence, that charm and rhetoric will be enough. They aren't, because the breakthrough in this story is not just scientific or procedural, it's narrative. The prosecutors don't simply list facts, they connect them. The VW, the cast, the approaches near campuses in Washington and Utah, the escapes, the sudden appearance in Florida under a false name, the stolen car, the timeline that shows him in Tallahassee exactly when the attacks occurred. And then there's that small, red-printed receipt. Earlier in the investigation, it was just another item bagged and tagged from his car. Now, it is brought into the light. The ink, the timestamp, the location, all of it places Bundy in the right place, at just the right time to contradict his own claims and reinforce the prosecution's story of his movements. On a map, that scrap of paper becomes a red dot that lines up perfectly with the path of a predator. The open loop from before is closed. What once seemed like trash is now a thread tying him to a chain of events he cannot easily explain away. The jury sees not only individual pieces of evidence, but a cohesion that is hard to deny. The forensics, the eyewitnesses, the survivors who escaped his attempts in other states and described the same face, the same methods, the same calm menace. The pattern is too consistent, the coincidences too many. Outside the courtroom, reporters crowd the steps. People argue in bars and living rooms about guilt, insanity, the nature of evil. Some still cling to doubt. Others have no doubt left at all. Inside, the jury files out to deliberate. It does not take them long. When they return, the room is hushed. The clerk stands. The foreperson answers the judge's questions with 3 words that change everything: guilty as charged. For the first time, the law has formally caught up with Ted Bundy, not as a suspect, not as a person of interest, but as a convicted murderer. No more hearings about technicalities, no more half-steps. The sentence comes later: death. Not just for one murder, but for multiple killings tied to the Florida attacks, layered with the weight of all the other cases shadowing him from across the country. Bundy reacts with a strange, brittle mix of defiance and theater. He tries to speak about injustice, about appeals, about higher courts. He never admits directly, never looks the families of his victims in the eye and tells them the truth. Control for him remains the point, controlling his image, his narrative, even as the legal system strips his power away. But in that courtroom, something irreversible has happened. The man who once counted on anonymity, on charm, on the blind spots in people's perceptions, has finally been seen clearly enough that 12 strangers could say, with one voice, that they know what he did. The masks he wore, student, counselor, boyfriend, law clerk, are no longer enough to protect him. From this point forward, time runs in one direction only, toward the execution chamber in Florida, and toward the question that still haunts everyone who has watched this story unfold. If he is guilty beyond reasonable doubt, if the evidence is strong enough to take his life, then what does that say about the mind behind his crimes? What kind of psychology can sustain such a double life, such prolonged deception, such systematic violence? The breakthrough in the investigation answers who did it and how it can be proven. The breakthrough that remains, the one the tapes hint at, the one experts still debate, is why he did it, and what, if anything, that understanding can teach the rest of us. After the verdict, after the sentence, Ted Bundy's world narrows to concrete, steel, and routine. He becomes inmate Bundy, one of many men waiting on death row, but unlike most, he carries a strange kind of notoriety with him. His name is known far beyond those prison walls. Outside, the families of victims try to go on with their lives. Some feel a measure of relief that a court has finally acknowledged what happened. Others find that no verdict can fill the space left behind by a daughter, a sister, a friend. Grief is not solved by a gavel. Journalists, authors, and psychologists circle around the case. Some come to the prison to interview him, hoping for insight, confession, or at least a clearer picture of the man behind the crimes. Bundy understands this attention, and he uses it. On death row, his need for control shifts form. He can no longer control where he goes or what he physically does from day to day. What he can still try to control is the story. In interviews, he alternates between denial and partial admission, between speaking in the third person and skirting direct responsibility. Sometimes he blames violent media or pornography, hinting that they played a role in his development. Sometimes he talks about compulsion and urges, about a side of himself he describes as separate, as if he were overtaken by something beyond his control. Criminal psychologists recognize many of these moves. They see the narcissism, the need to be exceptional, even in the realm of evil. They see the psychopathic traits, superficial charm, lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, shallow emotional responses. Bundy doesn't just want to be understood, he wants to remain central even as others dissect him. When building a psychological profile of someone like him, several elements stand out. First, there is the early environment, the confusion about his parentage, the secrecy around his origins, the sense that identity itself was something fluid and negotiable. That kind of foundation doesn't create a killer by itself, but it can plant seeds of distrust and alienation, a feeling that reality is not what it appears to be. Second, there are his personal traits. He was bright, observant, and highly attuned to how others perceived him. Instead of using those skills to build genuine connections, he used them to mimic. He learned how to appear responsible, loving, trustworthy, even when his internal world was detached and increasingly violent. Third, there is his inner fantasy life. By his own later accounts, he spent years feeding a private world of violent fantasies. These were not fleeting thoughts, they became rehearsals. Over time, the line between thought and action eroded. What once lived only in his mind demanded expression in reality. Then there is the question of empathy. Most people imagining harm feel guilt, shame, or revulsion. Bundy did not respond that way. The suffering of others did not register in him the way it does in typical human experience. Instead, he focused on his own excitement, his own sense of power and control. That combination, grandiosity, lack of empathy, manipulative charm, and escalating violent fantasy, is at the core of what many experts describe as a psychopathic personality. Add opportunity, a transient lifestyle, and a series of reinforcing successes, evading capture, and you have a blueprint for someone who feels increasingly invincible. From a psychological standpoint, control sits at the center of his behavior. Control over victims' bodies. Control over when and how his attacks occurred. Control over information, alibis, and appearances. Even after arrest, control over the narrative, deciding when to hint, when to confess, when to withhold. His late-in-life interviews reflect this. When his execution date looms and appeals dwindle, he begins offering more details in exchange for time, dangling confessions as bargaining chips. It is one last attempt to dictate the terms, to make himself necessary, to delay the inevitable. He never offers full transparency. He never tells everything. Some victims remain unnamed, some acts unconfirmed, some locations unrevealed. That too is a kind of control. Even in death, he ensures there are blanks only he could have filled. For the public and for the field of psychology, the aftermath of his case leaves a heavy legacy. On one hand, it spurred advances in criminal profiling, interstate communication between law enforcement agencies, and recognition of how dangerous a seemingly normal offender can be. It forced investigators to confront the reality that monsters do not always look like monsters. On the other hand, it fed a troubling fascination. Bundy became a figure in pop culture, portrayed in films, discussed in documentaries, sometimes disturbingly romanticized by people fixated on his looks or his charisma. This tendency to sensationalize can overshadow the reality of his victims and the suffering he caused. For the families, there is no psychological theory that can make sense of their loss. No profile can bring someone back. No explanation can fully answer the question, why her? Why them? From a clinical perspective, one might say, he killed because he enjoyed the feeling of possession and dominance, because his internal restraints were weak or absent, because his wiring and experiences created a person who saw other human beings as objects to use and discard. From a moral perspective, that never feels like enough. And that brings us back to the tapes, real and imagined, and to his own words about control. If Ted Bundy wanted anything at the end, it was to frame his story in a way that kept him at the center. The complex case study, the misunderstood mind, the man whose origins could be endlessly debated. But the most important truth about his psychology is not that he was unique. It is that he was able to exist for so long because people were unprepared to recognize someone like him in the shape of a smiling, well-spoken young man. So the question that lingers is not just, why did he do it? It is also, what did everyone around him miss, and how many others like him learn the same lessons he did about how easy it is to hide in plain sight?